And that's why Swiss cheese does not conduct electricity. Welcome back to 103.9 History Cast.
Here comes Mrs. Roosevelt. Eleanor Roosevelt served as the president's eyes, ears, and legs, but used her own voice to push for change.
President Franklin D. Roosevelt, often called FDR, took office in 1933. It was the height of the Great Depression, the greatest economic crisis in U.S. history. In his first term in office, FDR and Congress enacted a series of programs known as the New Deal to help the economy recover and put people back to work. Although born wealthy, Eleanor Roosevelt had been a champion of the poor and disadvantaged all her life. As a social worker, a teacher, and then as a First Lady. When her husband was elected president, she looked for ways to use her influential position to help the millions of Americans who were suffering because of the Great Depression.
Travel had been difficult for FDR. Since 1921, he contracted polio and lost the use of his legs. Eleanor became his eyes, ears, and legs, crossing the country listening to stories of struggling Americans.
In 1933, Eleanor Roosevelt travels more than 38,000 miles, visiting slums, farms, factories, and mining towns across America. Often she's accompanied by Lorena Hickok, known as Hick, a former journalist. Hickok was hired by FDR to travel the country and report on the impact of his New Deal programs. Hickok has brought Miss Roosevelt to a poor neighborhood in a New York City. Then women pass barefoot children begging for food in a bread line that stretches across the corner.
Is at how much suffering exists in the world. I'll never complain about my own circumstances again.
Do you think the government programs are helping people?
I believe they are giving some hope. The CCC men are happy to be working, but many people have been left out of the New Deal. Do you know who I think needs most help?
Who?
I'll show you.
Roosevelt and Hickok knock on an apartment door. The woman who opens it is pale and thin. Her clothes are torn. The tiny apartment is dingy and sparse.
Hello, Ruth. Do you remember me? I visited last week. I want you to meet someone. This is Miss Roosevelt.
Miss who?
Ruth, would you mind talking with her for a moment?
I'm not in trouble, am I?
No, of course not.
Jones leads the two visitors to a table in the middle of the room where another sad-eyed woman is reading the newspaper.
Anna, this is Miss Roosevelt, the First Lady.
Wow, it's an honor to meet you, Miss Roosevelt.
A pleasure to meet you both. I'm here to learn more about what you're going through and see how the government can help.
Ruth, Anna, could you tell Miss Roosevelt about your life here?
We worked on sewing farm machines at a factory downtown, but it closed down 2 years ago.
3 other women live here too.
5 of you live here in this little apartment?
Yes, ma'am.
What brought the other women here?
One had a husband who worked in a bank. When he lost his job, he just disappeared. The other 2 are sisters who moved to the city from a farm, looking for work. They're still looking.
How do you get along? We eat what we can find, whatever people will give us.
Sometimes we go stand in the bread lines or go to soup kitchens, but we hate that.
But bread lines are for people who need help, like you. Why do you hate them? It's embarrassing.
If we had husbands, they would stand in the lines. Doing it ourselves shows we're all alone.
It makes us feel like failures. It sounds like you ladies want to do work.
Of course we do.
We've lost our jobs, just the same as men have. But everyone seems to think jobs should only go to them.
Nobody seems to care about the single woman.
When the visit is over, Jones and Pierce watch through a window as Roosevelt and Hickok walk back to their car. When the visit is over, Jones and Pierce watched through a window as Roosevelt and Hickok walked back to their car.
She doesn't look fancy enough to be the president's wife.
It was her, all right. She looks just like in the newspapers.
I've never heard of a first lady traveling around talking to people like us. I thought they just hosted fancy parties.
Miss Roosevelt isn't like other first ladies. She has always worked. She used to be a teacher here in the city.
Most people think it's strange for any woman to want to work. What must they think of her?
It seemed like she was really listening to us.
Look, the president's wife is driving her own car. Doesn't she have a chauffeur?
Maybe she just likes doing things herself.
Franklin and Eleanor Roosevelt have viewed Harry Hopkins, one of the president's closest advisors, in the White House. An architect of the New Deal, Hopkins oversees the CCC and other job programs.
Mr. President, I think you'd be pleased with the work the CCC is doing.
I can use some good news.
In Wyoming, the men have been planting trees that will keep the soil in our national parks from eroding. They're repairing roads in Texas and helping construct the new Golden Gate Bridge in San Francisco.
Isn't it great, Eleanor, that these once idle men now have a purpose? They can provide for their families now while strengthening the nation.
You know, I think it's a wonderful program. In fact, I wanted to talk to you about it, expanding it to include women.
I'm not sure the public will support programs for just women. We can't even find enough jobs for the men.
Women are hurting too. Married women are struggling to provide for their families while their husbands are out of work, and single women have nowhere at all to turn. Hick and I have visited a tiny apartment in New York where 5 single women are practically starving. A program could help these women find relief and job training.
If I may, Mr. President, I believe Mrs. Roosevelt is right. Women have been left out of our efforts. With your support, I'd like to explore this idea.
I think it's all over.
I believe I have just the thing.
With the president's support, the First Lady creates Camp Terra near Bear Mountain, about 45 miles north of New York City. It's the first camp to provide relief and job training to single, unemployed women.
The First Lady soon visits Camp Terra. She and the camp's directors stroll through the wooded grounds.
Women sleep in the barracks just like the men at CCC camps. They wake up with the sun from meals, take classes, and receive job training.
How is the camp helping the women?
Many women come here exhausted. They're malnourished. They need rest, food, and medical care, all which they get here. Over here is the pond where they can swim and get exercise.
What kind of job training did they receive?
They all have shifts in the greenhouse, learning how to work with plants. We also have educational and secretarial classes for the women.
After the tour, Eleanor Roosevelt calls Hopkins.
Harry, it's a beautiful camp, but they aren't doing enough. Only 30 women are here.
I know, Mrs. Roosevelt. There has been some delay and problems with the paperwork.
But there are hundreds, thousands of women who would benefit from being here.
Mrs. Roosevelt, you have to understand what we're up against. No one believes women should receive government relief, and not even thinks a First Lady should be involved in policy making, as are you.
Harry, you know I'm not one to keep quiet.
By 1936, 90 women's camps have been created across the country, though never as big as the men's CCC camps. They provided relief for more than 9,000 women and brought attention to their struggles.
During her time as First Lady, Eleanor Roosevelt continued to fight for laws and programs to help women and unprivileged groups. She also voiced her opinions in speeches, writings, and press conferences. After leaving the White House in 1945, she became a delegate to the United Nations and a champion of human rights around the world. Throughout her life, she showed that women could be as independent and powerful as men. In doing so, she became one of the most influential women of the 20th century.
Thanks for tuning in to 103.9 History Cast. We accept all donations even though this is a fake broadcast.
And enjoy your life.